This video will walk you through the first few steps to beginning your value drawing of a crumpled piece of paper. What I have here in the view is my toned piece of paper. And as you can see here, it is toned to a mid value. So I've got my value scale handy, and I'm going to keep it handy as I draw in shade so I can use it as a reference point anytime I'm struggling with pinpointing what value a shadow should be or what value a light area should be. I'll always have my value scale handy. As you can see, the value that's represented on my piece of paper right now is a mid value. It's not quite 4, but it's pretty much number 3 here. So starting with a mid value, you might have something that's closer to number 4, a little bit darker. That's okay too. Or maybe yours goes right in between. But either way, a nice mid value, somewhere between 4 and 3 is a good place to start your crumpled paper drawing. And what we're going to be doing first is using just lines. So this first part is just review, right? We've done a ton of line drawing, observational line drawing at school already. So this part will just be review for you. You don't have to worry too much about contour line because we're going to be eventually using shading to show form in our subject, but just a basic medium to light outline. Depends how dark your ground is that you're starting with, but I'm just going to start off with a very light line. If your toned paper is a little bit darker than this, then you'll have to just push down a little bit harder to draw out your paper so that you can see your outline. You do not want to jam the pencil lead down on the page while you draw and make it a really heavy line, because eventually we're going to want to work to try to get rid of those outlines in the end, but we're not there yet. We're just starting. Also, what I have here that you can't see in the view is my photograph of my crumpled piece of paper up on my Chromebook, all plugged in here, so it's hard to see, but there's my photo. I have it up in front of me, and I will be working exclusively from the photo the whole time that I work on this. Drawing from a photo for beginning drawings is a really great way to hone your observational skill. The reason why I had you take a photo and work that way instead of actually having the crumpled paper in front of you and drawing it is because if you had the crumpled paper in front of you when you were drawing this afternoon, for example, the light would be different when you went back to draw it maybe tomorrow night with lamplight on, or in the morning when the light changes. So changing light can be a big challenge in drawing from observation. Now, drawing from direct observation, having the object right in front of you while you're drawing is always the best way to draw. But for beginning drawing where you don't really want to have that challenge of different light coming in through the window and the light changing and the shadows changing and that all those obstacles, drawing from a picture works really well. So that's why we're drawing from a photograph instead of from actual reality. So I've got my photo here. I've got my value scale as a reference for when I need it. I have some erasers. So first, just going to start with a line. I want the piece of paper to take up as much of the paper as possible, but in my photograph, the paper's over to the right a little bit, and there's an elongated shadow that goes right off the paper. So I'm gonna keep my drawing over to the right as much as possible so I have room for my shadow while trying to make it take up as much space as possible. So I don't wanna have a teeny little drawing in the middle of this big piece of paper. Okay, so I'm gonna begin here. So I'm beginning with a very general shape. And as I said, beginning with a very light line. But keeping the shape very general for now, instead of getting into super fine details right off the bat, because I want to make sure that I'm laying out my paper the way I want it to be. If I get bogged down in little details and little crinkles, say in this little corner first, and then try to build off of that, I might not be filling my space as much as I could. It might end up being too small in the end, might end up being too big and actually going off the paper. So always start with a big general shape. You can always fix it after, but this is the basic amount of space that my crinkled piece of paper is going to occupy on my paper. And I'm satisfied with that. I have a little bit of room here to add my shadow. It will go off the side of the page, but looking at it now, I can assess that yes, the placement is good. I'm going to get the whole thing in the paper while still taking up a lot of space without having wasted too much time. If I did do anything that I feel is a mistake, for example, like this edge, I can erase on here. You'll notice when you erase your line though, it does leave a white mark because we're working on the toned piece of paper. So I just like to leave this, keep this little piece of scrap paper handy. And I just color some graphite on there and then hit up that spot that I just made lighter when erasing with that. You can also keep a piece of paper towel handy for that purpose too. So you could also deal with it this way, apply a little bit more graphite over the area that you just erased and then take paper towel and smudge over it. So this I feel has to be adjusted and come out here. This goes in. It's just looking at the outer contour for now of my paper. And then just start to look at some of the main crinkles and what direction they go in. See, crinkle here. Just breaking the inside of this up with some of the bigger basic shapes I see within the paper itself, using just line for now. When we shade it, it's going to all make a lot more sense. It's going to start to take form. It's the shading that is really going to make it look real. So don't be surprised or discouraged if after you get this all laid out on paper with line, it still doesn't really look like much, because it really is the shading that's going to bring it to life. Okay, so bring it a little closer so you can see it. So that's my basic outline of my crumpled paper. As I said, it doesn't look like much yet. The other thing I'm going to do is actually add in just a basic outline of my shadow that's being cast on the table. Once you have the basic outline of your drawing established on your paper and you're happy with it, and don't rush that step, okay? If you're not happy with it, keep working with it, keep erasing, keep retoning and adjusting until you do feel happy with your drawing. This is basically doing the outline sketch first is basically like laying the groundwork for your drawing. And if you don't have it drawn to the scale you want, at this point, don't continue, because you're never going to end up liking the scale of it if you continue shading, right? This is the time to get the scale right, the proportions right, the placement right. So really take your time with that step. It's like you're building the foundation for your drawing. If you have a weak foundation, it's not going to be a strong drawing. So I did mine pretty quick because I draw all the time, but if you need to take more time to do so, please do so. But when you are done with that, the next step is pretty easy. You have to locate two things by looking at your photograph. So again, I've got my photograph. You can't see it in my view, but I have it right in front of me. It's open up on my Chromebook screen right here. And I also have my value scale to use as a reference. And you need to locate your lightest light and your darkest dark in your photograph. So looking at that photograph, and this is where having the value scale comes in handy. You want to locate this, the lightest light areas in your photo, and the darkest dark areas in your photo, and you're going to apply those into your drawing. Okay, so lightest light, darkest dark. I'll start with my lightest light. And in my photo, I see my lightest light in two places, or two general places, and it might be more than two places. So really the one thing that helps is to kind of squint at the photo and see where the absolute lightest lights, what could be compared to the white paper, the white of your paper. Where are those kind of jumping out at you when you squint down and look at your photo? And the areas where I see it lightest are actually in my background here, not over here or here, but it's just in this upper right corner because my light is coming from the right-hand side. And it is also lighting up this middle area significantly to the point where it's like pretty much pure white. And then there are a couple of other places. So to remove my lightest lights, I'm actually going to use this eraser because it's a more aggressive eraser. It pulls away more graphite faster. So I'm going to just pull away. We talked about how this is called the additive subtractive technique in drawing. And right now we're working subtractively to remove our light values or our white values specifically. And I'm not getting detailed with it yet. I'm just pulling out large general shapes where I see my lightest light. As you can see, it's very satisfying. The graphite should come right up with your eraser. Okay, now I see it here. So I'm going to just use the side of my eraser to remove a lot of the graphite. So the lightest light you might find in a couple of places within your paper itself, but also in your background too. So when you're looking at your photograph, you got to take the whole thing in. Don't just concentrate on your subject, which is the crumpled paper, but look at the whole thing and work inclusively between your background and your crumpled paper. Now, if you don't have any lightest light areas in your background, don't worry about the background yet. We'll get to that at a later time. And this is pretty much where I see my lightest lights. There's another little area right here. I see it. And tops of those. And that's pretty much it. So now we're starting to see areas where my light source, which is coming from the right, is hitting the paper very drastically. So then next I have my lightest light established. Now I'm going to locate areas where I see my darkest dark, or the darkest my pencil lead will go. And I see those areas in the shadow directly underneath my crumpled paper, and in this area right below where the lightest light is picking up. Those are where I see my darkest dark. So that's the only place I'm going to apply my absolute darkest dark. So I hope this doesn't shake too much. If it does, I apologize. Darkest darks. So shading in my shadow. So your darkest darks might be in different places. And it all depends on where your light is placed, what type of light you used, all that stuff. So no two people's situation is really going to be the same. So you do have to look at your own photograph and see what's what. I notice as I'm shading my shadow, not that I have to get it perfect yet, because I can always go back to it, but as I'm shading the shadow here, I notice that as it moves away from the light source and away from the piece of crumpled paper itself, it lightens. Shadows will always be darker directly underneath the object that they're under. They'll always be darkest right there, and then as they move away, will lighten. So keep that in mind whenever you do your shadow. Chances are you're doing at least part of it now as you establish your darkest dark. Now some of you, after you do this, might really hate how streaky that looks. So what you could do, and again, you could either do this at this point or later, but you could work back over it in another direction to try to even it out, much like the way we did the value scale. You can also get a piece of paper towel and blend things out using the paper towel a little bit too, and you'll notice that that makes a big difference, especially if you're using an ebony pencil or some kind of special graphite pencil. Even with number 2 pencil, it should work. If I were using number 2 pencil or a mechanical pencil, I would definitely use the paper towel to help blend things out. Because the finer the pencil, the more like little individual pencil marks you're gonna have on there. So this will help just to blend things out a bit. And I'm gonna go back and revisit that shadow at a later time when I'm adding more detail and refining things. I'm gonna jump to my other areas of darkest dark. So I see some kind of heavy creases here where I see my darkest. And then right here. Again, a good way to figure out where your darkest darks are to squint. I mean, you guys can't see me as I'm working here, but I'm constantly squinting at the drawing, at the photograph rather, as I work to see what's jumping out at me right now. Where are the areas that are so dark, even when I squint, they kind of jump out at me. So the same thing applies. And then I see some really dark creases in here. These are pretty sharp. This isn't my darkest dark, but I just want to get a different value in there. It's one of my darker values. I just want to shade that in so you can see the difference between this pretty dark value in relation to some of my darkest darks, so you can see the difference. And like before, if you don't love all that mark making in there, you can use paper towel to blend it. And that's it for day 1. So obviously there's a lot of details that need to be hashed out in here. This is not anywhere near complete, but just for day 1 of starting your drawing, these are the things that I want you to really look for and map out. So you're drawing lightly with line first, get your entire composition mapped out, get all your proportions figured out, then locating your lightest light and your darkest dark, shading or taking away in order to show those. So basically what we have in this drawing so far, and it is underdeveloped. It's not at a stopping point yet. It's really just at a starting point. But right now we have, I would say, can you see both these things on the screen? I would say probably 4 values total so far. So we've got our lightest light, our darkest dark, of course, because we just did that. We already had the middle tone. Some of the values that I continue shading after, like this guy, is more like the 4 there. So we've already got right off the bat 4 values established, and that's one of the reasons why I like you guys to start with a toned piece of paper, is because it helps you basically start with almost a full value scale just by doing a little bit of additive and reductive work, you have almost a full scale of values in your drawing to start. Obviously, as I start to pick up different nuances, like in this area, you can't see my photo, but it's lighter there, and then it gets darker, and then it gets lighter, but it's darker than my background, and I start making comparisons between all those different values and showing those distinct shapes of value. This will become a very detailed drawing. But for today, this is all you have to worry about.